DND number 9, The Circle of Life in Jesus' Name, Chapter 5. It's April 2nd, Tuesday morning, Kino Martial Arts Studio, Newport, California. Breathing hard, Gabe bent over, his hands on his knees. The sweat poured from his body, actually splashing on the mat in front of him. He tried to take a few deep breaths to slow his breathing. Using the shoulder of his gi, he attempted to wipe some of the sweat from his brow. The only thing that felt good about his current condition was that at least he wasn't the only one. "Attention," Master Mark Adams called. The class lined up. Gabe hustled into place. He thought, or hoped, that maybe the class was over, but they were only being directed to divide into groups for sparring. He had to reach down deep and find some reserves in order to continue. Gabe was a black belt. So was Taylor. Joey Adams was a 7th Dan, his older brother Mark a 6th Dan. Young Eric, JoJo, and Logan were all 3rd Dans. Ricky Kino was 8th Dan in several styles of martial arts, which is also a Grand Master, though only every once in a while did anyone ever address him that way, because Ricky was, well, Ricky Kino. Grandmaster Eric Kino was a 10th Dan in at least 6 styles, but also had mastery over many styles that did not use the belt system of ranking. They were in one of the original Kino studios, which was also the largest. Currently, there were about 40 students in class, with plenty of room since the class area resembled a high school gym. Gabe was thinking that maybe it actually used to be one. Gabe was relieved when Taylor was divided off to a female sparring group. Shelley Kino, a 3rd Dan herself, was asked to help supervise the female groups. Gabe could see that the others in the Kino/Adams family were moving around from group to group, giving pointers, critiques, addressing an act of poor sportsmanship, and making a ruling on a discrepancy. Gabe peered around at his group. They were all black belts. Some were larger than him, some were smaller. He didn't know what they were about to see. He didn't know that they were about to see who was the best. The first 2 called out to spar by the group leader were equally matched. Gabe studied their every movement to see what would and wouldn't work. Their group was one of the largest, so he figured it would take some time for them to all have their chance to spar. Gabe was one of the last to be called. He was glad because he needed the time to catch his breath. He went 3 2-minute rounds and turned out to be the victor. He was surprised to find that after everyone in his group had sparred, the winners were asked to line up again and pair off. Once more, he had to reach down deep and find some reserve. This match was not as easy as the first. Gabe had to actually put some power behind his punches and kicks. He gave it his all, and again he was the winner. And that brought him to the final. Thank goodness they gave him time to rest. He grabbed some water and sucked air into his lungs. Gabe's group of male black belts was the only group left to name a winner. The rest of the class gathered round, cheering for one or the other. Nobody knew Gabe, so most of the class was cheering for his opponent, and Gabe tried not to let it bother him. They bowed to each other, took their stance, and waited for the command. Gabe was truly tired. He was hoping the other guy felt the same way. The first round, Gabe did nothing but block. The other guy was coming at him pretty hard. The second round, Gabe decided he had to do something, so he blocked and punched and blocked and punched, and each time he was surprised that he landed those punches. The class was now also cheering for him. He was ultra competitive, always had been, not outwardly as much as with himself. He decided right then and there that he was going to win this little class sparring competition, and sure enough, when the 3rd round was over, Gabe was declared the winner. He was not surprised by the show of sportsmanship and camaraderie from the rest of the class. After all, the Kinos were all about honor. The class was called to attention, winners were congratulated, homework assignments were given, and they were dismissed. And while everyone made their way out, Gabe sat down heavily. He didn't feel like he could move. He actually thought for a minute that he might be sick. Luckily, the nausea subsided. He noticed that the Kinos and Adams stood in a circle having an impromptu powwow. He thought about moseying over to listen in, but couldn't make his body move. He looked up to see Taylor standing over him with a cold bottle of water. That was a great job, Gabe, she said. Drink this. It's special water that will replace your electrolytes. You'll feel a lot better in just a few minutes. Gabe nodded his thanks and took the water and began sipping immediately. Taylor was still standing there, so he tried to make conversation. I wonder what they're over there talking about, he said, nodding at the family. You, she answered. He looked up in surprise. I wonder what I did. She laughed, like you don't know. He truly was puzzled, but he didn't have the energy to even think about it. Finally, their meeting broke up and everyone turned with a smile to approach Gabe. Grandmaster Keno approached. Gabe tried to stand, but he put a hand on Gabe's shoulder. Sit. Gabe didn't argue. He slumped back down. Grandmaster Keno actually knelt in front of him. You did a great job out there today. Thank you, sir. I'm very proud of you and of Master Apple, who has taught you well. Well, I hear he learned from the best, Gabe said with a smile. There were murmurs of agreement from the family. We have a proposition for you, and please feel free to be honest in your answer. Gabe nodded. Yes, sir. Over the next 4 days, Keno Martial Arts would like to sponsor a little mini competition. We would select another black belt to fight against you on Saturday. You both will train for 3 days, and then on Saturday, there will be a 7-round match. Each round will last 3 minutes with 1 minute rest in between. Ricky will train your opponent, and I will train you. We'll give all proceeds to one of Jeffy's foundations. Gabe started to answer, but Grandmaster Keno held up his hand. Allow me to finish before you answer. Oh, yes, sir. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Grandmaster Keno smiled kindly. This will not be an easy task. That is 21 minutes of fighting. I will train you harder than you've ever been trained. Oh, I can vouch for that, Shelley said. Me too, the other said. As I said, it will be difficult, but at the week's end, win or lose, you will have accomplished a great deal, and it will be an event to remember the rest of your life. Today, you showed your skills and your tenacity. You have also shown a great competitive edge that we admire. You are a credit to your parents. You've proven yourself to me, which is the only reason I make this offer. He motioned around to the rest of the family. You've also proven yourself to them. The family will divide up, and some will work with me, and some with your opponent. As much as we all love you, I guarantee that the ones who will work for your opponent will do it wholeheartedly and even ruthlessly. Another murmur of agreement. That is the only way that they can show you, that they can honor you, is to work as hard as they can to defeat you. Now, before you give me your answer, call your father, call Master Apple, call whomever you want and get their advice and input, and then give us your answer by 3 p.m. today. Oh, and one more thing, and it's a big thing. Whenever our family swings into action, there tends to be publicity, a lot of publicity. Whether you like that, whether you like that or hate that, you will have to be focused enough to push that aside. Our family's used to dealing with it. The celebrity thing, I'm telling you, it can change your life. And if you consent to do this, and since you're a minor, if your parents consent, and you win, you could get famous pretty fast. If you do poorly, which is unlikely, still, if that were to happen, it would be highly publicized. He rose. So no matter what you decide, you will be forever in our good graces. He stood back and bowed, and Gabe rose and did the same. The others gathered around and patted him on the back and mussed his hair and shook his hand, and then they all gathered their stuff and headed out to the cars. Gabe's mind was racing. He would make the cursory phone calls, but to him the decision was made. He knew exactly what Jeff and his father and Master Apple would say. You do not turn down Grandmaster Keno when he invites you to join him in any martial arts activity. Gabe knew it was going to be a hard task, just judging from the regular class he joined today, which kicked his butt. However, he was never one to shy away from something difficult, actually kind of thrived on it. This will not be a resting kind of vacation. They had lunch, and even though he hadn't given his answer yet, he noticed a marked difference. There were no starchy carbs on the table, no desserts. Pretty much the meal was protein and veggies, and a lot of it. The rest of the family had headed to their respective homes. It was only him, Grandmaster Keno, and Mrs. Keno. Gabe ate and cleared his plate and excused himself to make the calls. He sat down by the pool. The first call was to his parents. His mom was worried. His father was jacked and proud and thinking about flying out for the event. Master Apple was a ditto of his father and honored. And Jeff Davis was the same. Mrs. Davis was also excited for him. He knew they all would be. It was only 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but he went to find Grandmaster Keno. He was in the kitchen, kissing his wife. Oh, sorry. Shelley giggled. Sorry, we'll try to be more discreet. You have your decision, Grandmaster Keno asked. Yes, sir. And? It's yes. I could never turn down such an opportunity to learn from you. Eric nodded, his eyes dancing with pleasure. Well, then let's get to it. He pulled out his phone and called Ricky first, because he had only a few hours to find the opponent, though Eric was sure he'd already done some preliminary calling around to some of the masters of their local schools. He put his phone on speaker. Hey, Rick. It's a go? Yes. See you Saturday. Yes, you will. Tell Gabe I feel a little guilty for what I'm about to do to him. Eric smiled. Bring it. Gabe's eyebrows rose. Apparently, they weren't kidding about being competitive. A little trickle of dread entered his brain. You let that get to you and you'll lose in the first round, Eric said, as if reading his mind. Tough body, tough mind. Got it? Gabe nodded. Got it, sir. I will give your father a call and work out the details of the competition, but first, before we get to work, I have a promise I made you that needs to be fulfilled. You do? Eric smiled. Follow me. They went downstairs to the weapons room. Eric swung his arm around. You choose. Which one would you like to work with? Gabe walked along, eyeing the weapons. Nunchucks, bow staffs, scimitars, sword, sai, shurikens, kama, knives. I'd prefer you choose one you've worked with a bit, Eric added. Gabe nodded. Well, then, it's probably better to stick with either the staff or the nunchucks. Eric nodded. It's still your choice. I think I'll choose the bow staff. May I ask what helped to make your decision? Gabe sighed. Well, I'm about to start training for something important, and I have a little better control over the staff. And I don't want to accidentally bash myself in the head with the nunchucks before I even get started. Eric laughed. Good decision. What does it matter why I made the decision, if you don't mind me asking? Gabe said. Well, because where your mind is at is every bit as important as your body. Gabe nodded in understanding, and he looked up at Grandmaster Keno. So, what does my decision say about where my mind is at? Oh, so much. It says you're serious about doing your best in the coming competition, so you don't want anything to interfere in that. It says you don't think you're invincible. It says you have humility. It says you chose responsibility over fun, because everyone knows it's much more fun to play with the nunchucks than to swing a bow staff. It says you didn't need to try to show off for me before we begin your training. Gabe's mouth opened. Wow, all that? Eric smiled. All that and more. He picked up a staff and handed it to Gabe and bowed, grabbed another one for himself. Let us begin. New scene. It's still April 2nd, Tuesday, late afternoon. Pine Forest Country Inn, Pine Forest, Georgia. Jake rubbed the soapy sponge over the letters on the white shuttle van, Pine Forest Country Inn. But he wasn't really thinking about what he was doing. It had been 10 hours since that early morning kiss. He couldn't get it out of his mind. How was he supposed to function like this? He really needed to kiss her again. If he was being honest, he needed more than just a kiss, but he forced that thought from his mind. This was just not going to work. He wanted to pursue a relationship with Lena, but he had to leave again. Would she wait for him? Would it be fair to her? Uncle Chaz had told him to let her make that decision, but actually, he was getting way ahead of himself. He needed to talk to her and clear the air and see where her head is at. When he'd kissed her, she'd fought it at first, but then it was obvious it was precisely what she wanted. It was just so hard with Lena to know exactly what she was thinking. Sighing, he rubbed his hand on his jeans to dry it and pulled out his phone. She answered immediately. Hey, hey, uh, would you consider having dinner with me tonight? Yes. Well, okay. So, any suggestions as to where? I mean, I've been gone a while. Is there some place you'd like to go? Nope. We can just keep it casual and head to Joe's. He nodded. Joe's Bar and Grill had been around for 40 years and was owned by Lena's grandfather. It sounds good. I'll pick you up at 6. I'll be ready. He put his phone in his hip pocket and breathed a sigh of relief. He had 2 hours to finish up the chores he'd volunteered to do at the inn, shower, and dress. He swung into action with renewed energy. And at 5:55, Jake stood at the Stewart's front door, showered, dressed in jeans and a black knit shirt. He rang the bell, heard a rumble of loud footsteps, and the door opened. It was 12-year-old Matthew Stewart. Hey. Hi, Matt. Would you get Lena for me? Sure, come on in. Jake watched as he went to the bottom of the steps and yelled, Lena! Jake's here! He then turned and headed to the kitchen. Jake looked up as Lena came down the steps. She was wearing a dress. His heart stopped. He wasn't sure he'd ever seen her in a dress. It was soft and feminine, some sort of flimsy material, white with tiny blue flowers on it, short, with a ruffle at the bottom that brought attention to her muscular thighs. He swallowed hard. Hey, you look nice. I mean, really good. She smiled sweetly. Thanks. She came right up to him. You clean up real nice, too. Thanks. You're right on time. Is that a problem? She shook her head, her amazing red curls shimmering around her face. Nope, it's actually refreshing. He frowned. Because other guys have kept you waiting? Oh, to say the least. Well, it's a show of respect to be on time and an extreme show of disrespect to be habitually late. She laughed and gave a mock salute. Yes, sir, soldier, sir. Sighing, his eyebrows rose. Lena. You don't call a Marine a soldier. Oh, well then what are you? A Marine? Your father is a Marine, so you should know that. If I was in the Army, I'd be a soldier. Are you ready to go? She took his hand. Come say hello to my parents first. He nodded, and she pulled him into the kitchen. Jake, it is so nice to see you again. I'm still just getting used to you being back, Lisa Stewart said, moving forward and hugging him. Wow, don't you smell really nice? Mom, Lena said, protesting her mother being so personal. Jake laughed. Thanks, Aunt Lisa. Chaz walked forward and shook his hand and then turned to Lena. While I have you and your mother here at the same time, I need to ask you a question. Both women nodded. Ty wants to know if you want to press charges against this Brett Adderman. Press charges? Lena asked. For what? Lisa sighed and shook her head. For roughing you up in that parking lot. You do know that it's against the law, right? You do understand that no man has the right to do that. I already told you guys that it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Except the part about him giving you a concussion, right? Jake put in. Lena flashed him a look and he held his hands up. Sorry, it just slipped out. Jake's right, Chaz said. He hurt you bad enough to cause real damage. The question is, do you want to press charges? I'm not going to pressure you. It's your decision. If you want my opinion, I think you should. The guy does what he does because he's been able to get away with it. You should let him know that he cannot get away with it. Lena shook her head. I just want to put it behind me. I don't want to think about it anymore. So no, I do not want to press charges. Please, Daddy. He sighed. Okay, if that's your final decision. It is. Jake turned to Chaz. Can I speak to you privately a minute? Chaz nodded, and he and Jake moved into the living room. Jake looked uncomfortable. What's on your mind, son? Can I borrow your car? Huh? Jake shrugged. I brought my motorcycle. I didn't think Lena would be wearing a dress. Chaz chuckled and pulled keys from his pocket and tossed them to him. Take the Explorer. Thanks, Uncle Chaz. You know, I thought you were going to talk to me about paying a visit to Brett Adderman or something. That is going to happen. I just didn't realize you wanted to come along. Oh, I'd prefer it, Chaz said. Jake nodded. Well, then plan on it. The women came into the room, and Chaz kissed his daughter on the cheek. You two have fun. Thank you, sir, Jake said with a smile. Lena immediately turned to leave, and Jake followed behind. She stood in the drive, looking at his motorcycle, but he ushered her to the Explorer. We're going in Dad's car? Yeah, it's either that or you sit your pretty self on the back of my motorcycle. She giggled. I guess we'll save that for another day. They headed to Joe's and made their way inside and sat at a small table. Jake chose a place where he had his back to the wall. He smiled at Lena. So, we could waste time with some small talk, but I don't think that's how either one of us operates. Agreed, she said. It's actually one of the things I like about you. You're a no-nonsense kind of girl. She nodded. One of the things? That means there are other things you like about me? He smiled. She was definitely getting right to the point. Of course. Your quick mind, your honesty, your strength, your confidence, and you are one beautiful girl. But, he shook his head, there is no but. You are all those things, Bugs, and I've felt that way for a long time. Well, if you felt that way, then why didn't you tell me? They looked up as the server came and took their order. They ordered buffalo wings and waffle fries, and Jake started to order a beer, taking advantage of his new privilege of turning 21 a few months ago. Then he remembered she was only 20, so they got some sweet tea instead. The server went to get their drinks and put in the food order, and he looked down and back up into her gorgeous green eyes. Let's see, where were we? You were about to say why you never told me how you felt about me. He nodded and sighed. You know, my father was in the military, right? He was special ops with Keegan Tanner. She nodded. They're Marines, he added. She smiled. Semper Fi, oorah, and not soldiers. Yeah, I got it. He chuckled. You see how quick your mind is? I'm losing my patience. Okay. So, from the time I was a little kid, I wanted to be a Marine. I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to make a difference. It was like this burning desire. It's all I could think about. I felt like I was born to be a warrior. Add my faith into that, and it began to feel like a calling. She sighed. Okay. And then there was you. You know, a long, long time ago, I thought of you as my cousin. I mean, I called your parents my aunt and uncle. I remember asking my mom about it once, and she explained to me that we aren't really cousins. I remember feeling really relieved because I had a crush on you, a big one. And then we got a little older, like in our teens, and I realized that you might like me too. It was a wake-up call for me because I knew I couldn't have you. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be fair to you. She shook her head. What are you talking about? I knew I was leaving right out of high school, Lena, going away to join the Marines. What was I supposed to do? Tell you how I felt about you, and then what? We'd be together, right? And then I would leave you for who knows how long. And while I'm off doing my thing, you'd be here, alone, waiting for me to come home. Wow. Wow? He asked, her tone making him wary. You really are an idiot. He blew out a breath. What am I missing? I was home, alone, waiting for you to come home, wondering if there was ever a chance for you and I to be together, knowing you would eventually come home to see your parents, and maybe you would see me in a different light. At least if I'd known you had some kind of feelings for me, it wouldn't have hurt so much. Maybe if you'd given me the chance to make a choice to wait for you, the past 3 years would have been somewhat bearable, knowing that when you did get home, we would be together. Instead, it's been hell. You didn't think that I could make a decision for myself, so you made it for me. Her eyes were blazing fire, and he was at least smart enough to know to not say, calm down, to a woman who was pissed. He wasn't quite sure what to say. He finally came up with something. I'm sorry, Bugs. It wasn't because I thought you weren't capable of making your own decisions. It was more like I was trying to protect you from having a miserable life, waiting on me to come home. I guess I didn't realize how strongly you felt. I didn't mean to hurt you. You gotta believe that. She softened and sighed. I believe you. Their food was served, and they ate silently for a few minutes. He watched her eat the chicken wings, smacking her lips and licking sauce off her fingers, and his heart took a tumble. He shook his head. Now what was he supposed to do? He decided to change the subject. I heard you were the one taking care of Santana while I was gone. She grinned. My dad tell you that? Yes, he did. I've been taking care of most all the horses, every morning, every night. Well, that's hard work. It doesn't bother me. I like it. Well, I just wanted to say thanks. I truly appreciate you taking such good care of my horse. She shrugged. No prob. She stuffed a waffle fry in her mouth. So, tell me about this raider thing. I hear the training is pretty tough. He smiled. Yeah, it's tough, but it sure ain't pretty. And your dad and Mr. Tanner, they both used to be Marine Raiders too, right? No and yes. They didn't used to be Marine. And yes, they're Raiders. There's no such thing as a former Marine. Once a Marine, always Marine. He suddenly stiffened, his eyes immediately taking in and addressing what was happening in front of him. He estimated the distance to the exit for Lena. What's wrong? He sighed. Your little friend just walked in with 3 of his buddies. What little friend? Brett? Yes, and don't turn around. I won't. I just hate when someone does that, don't you? His lips twitched with a smile. Yep, I hate it. Do you think they're just hanging out, or are they here to cause trouble? Lena asked for his assessment. Well, that depends. Does Brett usually carry? No, I've never seen him with a gun. Well, then I think they're here to cause trouble. He sighed. Lena, it's hard to miss your red hair, so I know they're already spotted us. They're circling, looking for the best angle, which they won't be able to get. Why not? Well, because I have the best angle. So I need you to pretend you don't see them, make no eye contact, and walk out that door. No freaking way. Why did I know you were going to say that? You say there's 4 altogether? Lena asked. Looks like it. Well, I can help. Yeah, you can stop a bullet, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm not leaving you. And it's too late. Jake stood as Brett approached the table right behind Lena. He had one friend right beside him, one moving in from the right and one from the left. As far as Jake could tell, Brett was the only one with a gun. Can I help you guys? Jake said. Lena watched him. He looked very strong and very relaxed. Brett fingered the gun tucked inside his waistband. Yeah? You can step outside for a minute. Oh, just for a minute? That's all it will take. Jake nodded because he was right about that. He then pulled his shirt up an inch and tucked it behind his holstered weapon. Lena gasped, and Brett took a step back. Lena stood then and turned toward Brett. Have you lost your mind? What in the world do you think you're doing? What are you doing here with him? Brett nodded toward Jake. He's a friend of mine, not that it's any of your business. Yeah, like the friend you were flirting with the other day? Tell me, Lena, how many of these so-called friends do you have? Or should we call them what they really are? Friends with benefits. Lena drew in a sharp breath and started to spring at the guy. Jake was fast enough to reach out and grab her arm in a steely grip and sit her down in her chair. Jake nodded at Brett. Okay, boys, he conceded. Let's go outside. He definitely would like to take it outside where the innocent people sitting all around him would be out of danger. Or, he continued, trying to diffuse the situation, or you can just leave. If you do that, I promise not to hurt you. If we go outside, someone is going to get hurt. A couple of Jake's high school buddies, Kurt and Landon, approached then and stood right behind Brett. Hey, Jake, how's it going, buddy? You got a problem with these guys? I don't know yet. Guys, do we have a problem? Brett glanced behind him and backed down and shook his head. No, no problem here. Come on, guys, let's go. They watched as Brett and his friends left the bar, climbed into the gray Camaro, and sped away. Jake's friends laughed and shook his hand. Thanks, guys, Jake said. No worries, Kurt answered. I gotta say, though, I was kinda hoping you had a problem. I really want to see you in action. Jake shook his head. No, you don't. And that is the end of chapter 5.